Every time that I see a new horror movie, I find myself asking the exact same question. Are horror films just not frightening anymore? I mean, seriously, think about the last time that you actually got frightened by a horror film. It might have taken you a while to find an answer to your question. But is this a problem with us as people, or just a problem with the medium that we all seem to enjoy for some strange reason? It's not like they have become unenjoyable even. I still find myself enjoying lots of them, but would I say I have been scared by any of them? Most likely not. Films by companies like Blumhouse might get a short-term scare out of me with their overuse of jump scares and cheap tactics, but would I actually call the films themselves frightening? No. The last film that I can really think about being frightened by was most likely Ari Aster's Hereditary. The second half of the film was unlike anything I'd ever seen before, almost exactly after the point of the car accident, and had me drawn in, frightened about what could possibly happen next. And thinking back upon the film, the ideas of it still give that off feelings that come with actually scary things, a high bar for films to reach it seems now. But before I used to find many things scary, I remember I used to be terrified of the Blob after watching the 1988 remake where the monster comes out of the sink, making the idea of doing things like the dishes to me absolutely fucking terrifying to me as a kid, as well as Paul's death in the film had me subconsciously checking the ceilings for a monster that could possibly jump me at any given moment. But that was also when I was really young, so maybe I just grew out of it. But all these questions made me take a step back and ask myself, are the films themselves not scary anymore? Or have I just outgrown being frightened by horror films? But before I try to answer that, before I go any further, make sure that if you are new to the channel to like and subscribe for future uploads, as I upload once a week. Also let me know whether or not you agree with my thoughts in the video. Also, all opinions on here are my own. This is all just opinions, nothing more. Don't take this too seriously. It's just a fun little video I made. Okay, let's continue. I think when it comes to horror, we find they generally can be found in three categories: tight-paced thrillers, unrelenting horror, and slow burns. With one of my absolute favorite examples of the tight-paced thriller variety being Sinister. Okay, now let's talk Sinister. I saw Sinister around the age of 13, and while at that age I was starting to find a lot of the films that had scared me when I was younger just didn't have the same effect on me as they used to. And it had been quite a while at that point before a film had really gotten to me. Which actually leads me to somewhat of a conclusion that maybe this isn't something I've outgrown, and more so something that I just haven't seen something in a while that's really gotten to me. But I wouldn't really hold that against the films themselves, because something that could get me might not get anyone else, or something that gets everyone else might not get me. But Sinister just really bugged me. The music in every scene really was chilling, with the usage of Boards of Canada throughout being really a highlight. Because it builds this demonic, almost industrial atmosphere to the film, like these families are just cogs in this evil machine. The way the scares are set up is also good, with the lawnmower scare obviously being the standout of the film through and through. And the atmosphere of the film is just unrelenting up to the ending, which isn't great, but that's besides the point, with you wondering what could possibly be in the next possible tape, or how it could get any worse than what we have seen already. There's just something about the raw brutality of the Super 8 film that makes it just so much more unsettling in comparison to a lot of the other films that I had seen up to that point, as it really feels like you are stumbling upon some sort of fucked up snuff film in someone's attic, not some Hollywood horror blockbuster that makes everything feel unreal to the point of boredom. Now, do I think this is a perfect film? No, not by any means, but it was able to stick with me more than a lot of the other stuff that was coming out around the same time, and the film is heavily flawed. The ending is cliche-ridden, and it's a mess that almost ruins the film and turns it, in parts, straight up comical, and in others so unbelievable that it can cause you to lose interest in what you are seeing. But up to that point in the film has an extremely tight pace that doesn't let you go throughout, just continuously fucking with you throughout instead of being in an ultra slow burn. And that's not to say that slow burn films are bad, don't misinterpret that, but it does make a difference in scare factor when the film just continuously beats you down in the way that Sinister is able to do. But not much happens in Sinister in comparison to another film that I found scary, which is of course Balaguero's and Plaza's horror film Wreck. And sorry if I completely butchered their names, but it falls extremely within the unrelenting horror category, and it's a zombie film that doesn't let up for any of its runtime. No, seriously, this film does not let you go at all throughout. Something is always happening on screen to the point of it almost being overwhelming, and I mean this in the best possible way. The film is able to overwhelm your senses in ways that many other films just aren't able to do, and effectively uses the found footage format in the best possible way, making it so that you have no point of safety that you would find in many other films, which for many other films is the screen itself. With Rec, you are essentially dropped in the film. You are the cameraman, one of the characters in the story, allowing the film to make you feel like you are trapped in the apartment complex with them, as every single thing that could go wrong goes wrong. The film also quickly sets up that not a single person within the building is safe. Any single person could get infected or killed in mere seconds, with people that you think could be the heroes being the first ones infected or flung off railings. Then on the complete opposite side of the triangle is Hereditary, which is of course the slow burn horror film, which horrifies not with what we see, but rather the strings that control all of the lives that we don't see. The main horror of the film isn't shown till the end of it, and upon rewatching the film, it becomes even more clear they have no say in what is going to be happening to them throughout the film, and they are doing exactly what is set up for them to fall into. But it goes across naturally, not like in a way that it would be just like a screenwriting convenience, but more so like everything has been set up for them to be essentially trapped in this horrifying scenario. They think they have control over where their lives are going, but every single step in their lives up to that point has all been leading to this, and as the mystery unravels, we see just how completely surrounded they truly are. It also doesn't help that the creature that they are fighting isn't something that we can ever truly understand within our own world, but rather something so out of this world that doesn't even have physical form whatsoever, pulling the strings from behind till taking full control at the very end. So you may be asking, what do these three films have in common that makes them scary in the first place? And while this is all subjective to my taste and views on horror, I think the realistic feel of all these worlds is what makes the difference for me on whether or not they are actually scary. Every single one of these films is able to drag me into the world that we are seeing, with them setting up something tangible before our very own eyes, with many of the characters behaving in the way that real people would behave if they found themselves caught in the same unfortunate situations that our characters find themselves within. It feels like a lot of the films recently have been trying to focus on being more fun, and that's fine, but for me it just makes them seem like they're way less scary than they could possibly be. This is where a lot of the modern wave fails for me, as a lot of the time they are trying so desperately to crawl their way underneath my skin and really get me to the point where when it fails, it just comes across as desperate. Now you could also argue that I've just become desensitized to the things that I've seen on screen, and that is also probably true. But see, I've watched some films from the past, and they still find ways to get me that a lot of the newer stuff just doesn't get to me in that same way. But it also doesn't help that I think that a lot of the studios truly just don't understand how horror films should actually work because they're trying to make money. Every studio wants their film to be financially successful, and that makes sense. But what makes horror just so interesting is that the genre has to be constantly innovating in order for it to stay truly frightening for the viewer. I mean, think about it. Films like The Exorcist and Halloween are so well known because while they might not exactly be scary now, back then what they were seeing was so fresh and original that audiences really had no idea how to react to what was being shown. The last film I can really think of doing this level of innovation and trickery in the horror genre to an extreme extent was Paranormal Activity, because while the film itself has aged pretty poorly and isn't overall great, the idea behind it really hadn't been seen before, with the cameras filming throughout the house giving a layer of authenticity to the film that others didn't have at the time. What I would also like to add is that does not mean we aren't capable of getting a new, truly frightening and innovative horror film, or that there hasn't already been one. I feel like with a lot of truly great things now, we are shuffling through all the fresh stuff looking for the best of the batch. We always hear about the best horror films of the 80s, 90s, and 2000s, but was the quality of the horror films really higher than the ones now? I really don't think so. I just think with time that we have been able to find the best of the batch after years of sorting through all the lesser quality stuff. Right now we seem to be searching for the diamonds in the rough, so while a lot of the stuff like the Blumhouse horror films are just coming out that might actually be hiding some of the best and scariest horror films that we have ever seen. But that could also just be me being hopeful, or it could also be me completely just talking nonsense, but who knows? And that's what makes watching films so fun, is to try and find stuff that actually is innovative and scary while also sorting through stuff that is lesser quality but also still fun in the process. For every Hereditary, there's 10 Imaginaries, and it's something that's always just going to be how films are. So in conclusion, do I think that horror films aren't scary anymore? No, actually I don't. While I haven't seen anything recently to make me think that there's a lot of new scary stuff coming out, I could have just not seen it. There are so many horror films coming out every year that there's gotta be one that is scary in there. And also, what is scary is super subjective. What I find scary is not something that someone else would find scary. So I find films like Hereditary and The Babadook to be frightening. Someone else might find those films to be stupid and unscary in every single way. And could I just be desensitized to stuff? Yes, that's also a possibility. But do I think that films have inherently gotten to be lesser quality? No, I do not think that. But for me personally, what I find scary is a mixture of building an extremely believable world that you can get the audience in and then proceeding to trap them in with the danger of the film. Not cheap jump scares or bad writing, but actually meticulously crafting the narrative for the scares rather than around them. Many of you probably remember being too scared to go down a dark staircase at night as a child due to the fear that there might be some sort of monster that could cling on you and attack you at your weakest point. Or there was also the fear that there might be a monster hiding in your closet or underneath your bed that would take you away to some sort of other evil dimension. But of course, all these fears are eventually shown to be unfounded and makes you start to wonder what exactly caused these fears in the first place. Well, that could be linked back to one key factor, and that is the fear of being completely and utterly alone. And many films play off this fear masterfully, using this loneliness and isolation that the characters are being put through to instill some sort of fear into the viewer that something must be going wrong. It's to the point where it's almost a cliche within the genre itself, with many films having groups splitting up so that they can all be on their own to be picked off easier one by the killer. Even films like Cabin in the Woods parried it because it became so widespread, especially within the subgenre of horror. Loneliness is something that we all fear from a primal level, and why is that? Well, it most likely has to do with the fact that when you're alone, you're more vulnerable. So people began to fear it because it became like a weakness if they were all alone. And human beings are also social creatures, so being alone for very long can also cause you to start to lose your sanity. So essentially being alone is just an all-around negative thing. But how do films really make the idea of being alone frightening to the viewer in the first place? Well, to understand it, we need to look at 3 films that I think accentuate the fear of being alone to a perfect degree. First off is the Stanley Kubrick classic, The Shining, which is a character study on filmmaking on its own. From pioneering the Steadicam to the wonderful set design and acting, what's not to love about this film? Every single part of this film blends together in a way that just makes sense, and it's almost perfect throughout. And the way it portrays loneliness is really well done, and it's almost perfect in its execution. But to really see what makes it scary, we need to look at the Overlook itself. Set in rural Colorado, you can't get more alone than this. The hotel, which is normally bustling with life and full of people on vacations in the mountains, is now completely empty, with only the Torrance family remaining in the hotel. The loneliness of the situation is even more apparent when you see the pure size of the place, with long drawn-out hallways, grand halls, and huge ballrooms lining the hotel. It's less of an actual hotel and more of a resort due to all the things there are to do within the hotel itself. But the pure emptiness of the once life-filled hotel is quite off-putting, especially because you were able to see what the hotel is normally like before they are closed down in the season. Which, while that is happening, we also hear about how the people who take the caretaker job generally go insane and start murdering everyone around them. And that extremely empty space makes it so that the loneliness of what we are seeing is accentuated to the highest degree possible. How can you not feel lonely when you're 100 miles from the nearest civilization? It's just impossible. And as I stated earlier, human beings are social creatures. Going that long without interacting with different people can just drive someone mad, and that's what happens to the Torrance family. Now, I wouldn't exactly call Jack the most sane person upon entering the hotel for the first time, but he was more so just a useful idiot to the ghost rather than an actual murderer from the very beginning. When the ghosts first appear, it makes us wonder if the ghosts are actually there, or if Jack is just having some sort of strange hallucination which makes them appear. He seems to know all the ghosts' names, which lends to believing that they might just be in his head, but the film ultimately leaves it up to interpretation. What isn't left up for interpretation, however, is that the ghosts were able to find a way to exploit Jack as they know his one weakness, alcohol, and because of them giving him what he wanted, he does their bidding for them.
Here's Johnny!
However, they ultimately fail, as the still mostly sane Danny and Wendy are able to escape the area by making Jack get lost within the hedge maze, causing him to freeze to death. But what really lends to this factor of loneliness throughout the film is just the way we can't tell what is real and what is fake, which leads to one of the main fear factors of loneliness. The fear in this film comes from the fear that being alone will make you go crazy. Cabin fever is a form of loneliness that causes someone to have a mental breakdown and finally snap out when they are stuck in an area for way too long of a period. And The Shining does an excellent job for showing that fear in its final form. Another film that does loneliness a little differently is John Carpenter's The Thing. The Thing follows a group of scientists stationed in Antarctica when a dog arrives, hunted by a Norwegian, and starts to witness their own close encounter. This dog is, of course, the alien, as it begins to transform and take over the base through complete replication. This leads to everyone not trusting each other due to the fear of one of them being the monster, and there's absolutely no way to get help from the outside world due to just how alone they are. And while the main fear factor from The Thing comes from the monster itself and how you can't really trust another with the monster around, but the other fear factor definitely comes from just how physically isolated they are. They are in Antarctica, the most isolated place on Earth, thousands of miles from the nearest civilization. No one is coming to save them, and that's what makes what's happening to them even more frightening. They are completely and utterly alone. The Norwegian base also exemplifies this fear even more, because the nearest source of civilization nearby had to deal with the exact same thing that they are, but their base is completely destroyed with no survivors being left on the site. And I really just can't emphasize how good The Thing is at building tension and horror within the stuff that we are witnessing, making us question every single person around Macleod as we don't know who is truly human and who is not. The film makes us as paranoid as everyone else within and is able to give the viewer as almost cabin fever type feeling throughout as we question everyone's motives for their behavior. And that is why The Thing amplifies loneliness. It's able to make us fear the factor of being miles away from the nearest person when we are completely and utterly alone. But there's one last film that I think exemplifies the fear of loneliness, and that is 2019's The Lighthouse, directed by Robert Eggers. The Lighthouse is probably one of my favorite, if not my favorite film of 2019, as the cinematography and set designs of the film are just on point throughout, with the locations of the lighthouse showing loneliness to an extreme degree. The two lighthouse keepers, Winslow and Wake, are watching their lighthouse for 2 weeks to make sure boats are able to see the Nova Scotian waters. It's a pretty simple horror setup, with two men being trapped on this tiny lighthouse for multiple weeks. Literally anyone would probably go insane in that exact same situation. And they also proceed to go missing in the process. And the film does an excellent job at ramming that point into your brain, as there's no one even close to the lighthouses. Everything that is surrounded by them is fog and water. Just like in The Thing, there's quite literally nothing for miles. They are completely and utterly alone. And unlike The Thing, they have nowhere to go. They are stuck on an island. While it is futile and it would lead to your demise, you could still run away on Antarctica. You cannot run away on an island surrounded by water. You are stuck here. And this madness causes them to turn against each other, especially after Winslow spills the beans on him killing someone, causing him to flee the country to the lighthouse. Even revealing that they have the same first name, Thomas, but Wake berates Winslow, asking,
"Why'd you spill your beans, Tommy?"
which caused the insanity of Winslow to shoot up even more as he tries to figure out a way to get rid of Wake to make sure that he can't tell the authorities about his drunkenness and past actions. After all of this, the horror of the loneliness of the situation is unavoidable. You know that if you were in the same situation that you would find yourself going insane as well. There is no escaping the lighthouse. And with all that being said, the loneliness in horror films is unavoidable, as the fear of being completely and utterly alone is just too much to handle sometimes. The Shining uses loneliness to accentuate a feeling of cabin fever throughout the film, while The Thing uses it to show how there's no one to save them within anywhere around them. And The Lighthouse uses it to breed a feeling of paranoia throughout, as you don't know if they can really trust each other on this tiny island with no escape. And because of our primal fears of being alone, the films are able to scare us throughout the runtime. And that is why a good horror filmmaker is really good at building an atmosphere of being completely alone, even though it is cliche at this point. You are just more vulnerable when you have no one to help you. You're all alone, and someone could easily jump up behind you and get you from behind. There truly is nothing safe about being alone in a horror film. Horror has always been somewhat of a strange place, because while many genres use emotions as their main goals, horror's emotion is much more complicated. It's not something that we as people traditionally enjoy. See, fear is an emotion that many of us do not have a good relationship with. It's generally seen as a negative emotion, which doesn't usually correlate with what many people see films for, a form of escapism from the real world that surrounds them. So then you may be asking, why is horror one of the highest grossing forms of media within the entertainment industry? Well, I think it comes down to one factor. People just really seem to like the adrenaline rush that comes along with horror. I mean, just really think about it. People enjoy things like roller coasters and skydiving. People just enjoy being scared and the adrenaline rush that comes along with it. There's just something so entertaining and sought after by so many people about being scared and pushed to your absolute limits. And in order to do such a thing, horror has to play off said fears in order to cause that adrenaline rush to happen in the first place. If we don't see anything that scares us, then that adrenaline rush won't happen. And in the past videos, we discussed things like tight spaces and isolation, but one fear always seemed to come up as well within the discussion of said topics, that of course being the fear of the unknown. The fear of the unknown is something that we all experience. It's what keeps us from doing crazy stunts, as we don't know what could possibly happen at any time. And films and media have been using the fear of the unknown for decades. It's something so synonymous with horror that you really can't have horror without it, as there's nothing more scary than the unexplainable. And this has been going on for decades, if not centuries, going back to works of H.P. Lovecraft and alike, but one section of horror uses the fear of the unknown leagues better than all the others, that of course being cosmic horror. So you may be asking what exactly cosmic horror is. Well, cosmic horror is a subgenre of horror that uses the fear of the unknown to the most extreme degree. It's creating something that we really cannot describe or understand that is a threat to the characters within the story. It's often nicknamed Lovecraftian horror because the subgenre was founded by H.P. Lovecraft, a horror author with a problematic personality to say the least, but is mostly known for his works The Call of Cthulhu and The Shadow over Innsmouth, both of which use monsters that even the characters are unable to describe, with being described as so out of this world that there is no word in our language to describe them with. This writing style that is used really allows your mind to wander as you try and figure out what these creatures could possibly look like if there's no human way to describe it. And while the validity and quality of H.P. Lovecraft's work is often questioned, I think that the works that it defined and helped create is really what people are here to talk about. For example, John W. Campbell would also be inspired by the horror style, creating the short story Who Goes There?, which follows an Antarctica research team who discovers a spaceship which they accidentally blow up with a thermite charge as they try and thaw the structure. Within the wreckage, they find an alien, simply referred to as the Thing, which begins to assimilate and take over the base one by one. And if this plot sounds familiar, that's because it would be later turned into The Thing from Another World, and then eventually into John Carpenter's The Thing. And after the success of writers like H.P. Lovecraft and John W. Campbell, of course when film started to get its time in the spotlight, it adopted a similar form of horror, often called cosmic horror. One of the first major and well-known examples of it in filmmaking is of course 1958's The Blob, with a creature that came from a rock that we really don't have anything similar to. The horror really comes from what we do not understand, with how it works, with the gelatinous monster crawling and oozing its way into every crack and crevice it can shove its way into to catch its victims. The horror really doesn't come from the monster itself, but from its strange behavior and its unworldly appearance. There is no reasoning with it, there is no communicating with it, it's just a monster that is trying to figure out a way to consume. And while it may not seem entirely too scary now, the films that it inspired played off the same tropes for decades after. But no film would really perfect it till we reach Ridley Scott's Alien in 1979. Ridley Scott and H.R. Giger use a perfect blend of cosmic horror as they create something truly unworldly with the xenomorph. From the very first scene it's in, we have no idea what or how the creature works, as it's something so unlike anything we've ever seen that you really can't describe it in a way that makes sense to our brains. It's a true unknown to us. It's something that our brains cannot really comprehend nor understand. The way it takes over and impregnates a human host is unlike anything we've ever seen in our own ecosystem, and truly frightens us as we cannot fully comprehend how it works. That, combined with the fact that we know that the creature can crawl around in air vents with the ship is completely covered in, causes the fear of the unknown to be the highest it can possibly be. For Lovecraftian horror, it is almost a perfect film. But one scene from Alien really stands out on the cosmic horror front more than any of the others, that of course being the scene where they explore the wreckage of the alien ship. We've never seen anything like it within our own lives, so when we see the space crew enter the hall, we feel a sense of dread as we have no clue what could possibly be within the ship. Then they find the body of a strange alien with a huge hole within its stomach, which really makes our brains wander as we try to figure out what could possibly have caused its chest to burst open like that. Then finally there's the eggs themselves, and when Kane walks over to investigate them, while they look similar to a bird egg, they are however ginormous and covered in a leathery-like substance, once again unlike anything within our own world and ultimately culminating in this. But while I think Alien perfected the fear of the unknown better than many other films, it is not the only shining example of that I can think of. There's of course the most underrated and undervalued film of the 1980s with John Carpenter's Prince of Darkness, which uses the fear of the unknown to lure us within the trap of an evil demonic prince as he tries to take over the world, killing and mutilating a group of scientists in a way that we cannot truly understand. And then there's 2007's The Mist, about a group of citizens stuck within a supermarket as a mist covers their small town, hiding within it tons of monsters to drag away and kill whoever enters it. This film also has a perfect cosmic horror plot, as we have no idea what could possibly be residing in the mist, as it kind of hides what's ever in there. We only really catch glimpses of parts of the creatures at first, until we get to see the full, smaller creatures later. But I don't think any other film has captured cosmic horror in recent years better than 2018's Annihilation, which drops us into The Shimmer. The Shimmer is a plane that we really cannot understand as a human being. It takes the DNA of everything that is caught within it and combines it with all the other things trapped inside. This leads to horrific amalgamations such as alligators with many rows of teeth, slithering organs, and most famously a mutant bear that can imitate people's voices. All of these creatures really show just how weird and unworldly the Shimmer is. It takes things that we see as worldly, such as human beings and plants, and combines them together to make horrific creatures. Speaking of, nothing in Annihilation portrays the fear of the unknown better than the scene with the mutated bear. The bear, having already killed one of their group members, Cassie is able to recreate her voice in an attempt to lure any unsuspecting victims out. This ultimately leads to another death of one of their crew members, that being Anaya, but after being killed in the haunting scene with the bear, something truly horrifying is revealed. The reason the bear is able to mimic the speech patterns of the person killed is because the Shimmer refracts the pain and suffering of the brain of its victims into the bear's own body, meaning that part of Cassie was being tormented and painfully stuck within the bear, having to live in constant pain and suffering. This idea is so out there in its horror that we cannot even truly comprehend it. Like, truly imagine what a scenario like that would be like, being trapped within something that is not your own body, having to feel and live through your last moments every hour of the day. It's something so extremely terrifying yet so foreign to us, as there's nothing within our own world that would make a similar thing happen, thankfully. And that's what makes cosmic horror just so frightening, and why many films use the fear of the unknown to make the audience fear what they are seeing. This is usually why I say when I'm reviewing something that usually less is more, because the less we see, the more the fear of the unknown is able to play its trick. Using something that we really cannot understand to scare us allows our minds to wander with how it works, and allows us to fill in the gaps with something that is more terrifying than any film would be able to show. Space, a mostly empty plane of existence that surrounds us on all sides. If Earth is life, then space is the complete opposite. Life and space are incompatible. It's a cold, barren, dark wasteland, and no matter where we are, it's around us. So honestly, it makes perfect sense why so many horror films use this space, pun is intended. And as I've discussed in many of my previous videos, much of horror revolves around the fear of the unknown, and what could be more unknowable than the vast, uncharted expanse of space, making an ideal setting for horror. Let's start with the first film to use space in a way that was truly, I think, unsettling and horrific, that of course being 2001: A Space Odyssey. Like, yes, I know this is not the first film to use space in a creepy way, but 2001: A Space Odyssey I think was the first one to do it in a more modern sense. And it's also not very much of a horror film in the traditional sense, but the situation that we see our characters get themselves caught in is indeed undeniably horrific. And before getting into the plot details, spoilers are of course ahead, but honestly, if you haven't watched 2001 at this point, I don't know what to tell you. After a strange monolith begins to appear around space, one that is known for having evolutionary properties, a new mission directive is sent to the Discovery 1's computer, HAL 9000. However, HAL does not tell the crew members Dr. Bowman and Dr. Poole, instead leaving it to himself. So then, after HAL makes a mistake, the two doctors decide to try and disable the computer, as they no longer trust a computer that is making mistakes with their own lives. This is where the horror comes into play, as when Poole is fixing an antenna line, Hal shoots a pod at Poole, severing his air line, effectively killing him. When Bowman goes out to save Poole, Hal then kills all the crew members in cryosleep, essentially leaving Bowman as the only survivor. Bowman then asks,
"Open the pod bay doors, Hal."
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Forcing Bowman to crash into the ship and disable Hal. While disabling him, the robot begs and pleads, but as his brain slowly gets turned off, he dies singing his favorite song.
Give me your answer, do.
So while the film isn't exactly a horror film per se, this sequence, one of many, would set the tone for many space-based horror films for years to come. First, the atmosphere in the sequence, or lack thereof if you want to be funny, is helped so much by the location the sequence is in. If this sequence wasn't in space and it was just a group of scientists trapped in a lab by a robot, then the tension would be much less, as they could just break outside and walk away because the robot can't go outside. But see, this is space. The scientists have nowhere to go. They are surrounded by nothingness. They can't flee. They can't escape. Their only sanctuary in the great unknown is now unsafe. That makes the atmosphere in this sequence particularly effective and would be used in many other horror films set in space, as it creates a more trapped feeling than can be done with a film set on Earth. There's this isolation that comes with space. They are alone. There's absolutely no one to save them. They are miles away from any help. The planet they are closest to is uninhabitable, meaning that they are hundreds of thousands of miles away from the nearest civilization. They are all alone, with a robot who has now made its mission to kill each and every single one of the crew members on board in horrific fashion, and that honestly makes for a horror movie type scenario. And, as is commonly said, in space, no one can hear you scream. This, of course, leads to what I think could be widely considered the first modern usage of the space horror trope. Alien is of course not the very first film to use space, especially not the first to convey its emptiness and loneliness, but it was the first to perfect it. Many other films would try to convey the loneliness and isolation that Alien portrays, but no other would succeed to the same degree that Ridley Scott's classic is able to achieve, not even the film's own sequels. Saying that the original Alien uses space horror nearly perfectly would be the understatement of the century in my opinion, as this, I believe, still holds up as one of the most frightening experiences put to screen. You can really feel the nothingness that surrounds them in the vast wasteland that is space, making the already tight corridors feel that much tighter. And the film shows they are not alone. Upon finding the xenomorph, they realize that there are other species of life within the known universe, but if the xenomorphs are anything to go by, you might not want to meet the other things that are in there. The film still holds up perfectly due to the space that we were given. Pun is of course intended. Sorry for all the space jokes in this video, by the way. Due to it being in space, everything in the film is required to be inside, as everything outside would wipe our crew out within seconds. Because of that, the space that is given to our characters, it's much more limited than it would be normally, making the claustrophobia of the film that much higher, which I've already talked about in some of my other videos. Once again, just like 2001, that the fact that the film is in space naturally means that there's absolutely nowhere to go. Everywhere around them is deadly. So they are stuck in this cramped ship with no one to save them, because just like 2001, there's no one nearby to help. And even if there was anyone nearby, they wouldn't help their ship anyway, due to Weyland-Yutani caring more about bringing the alien back to them rather than the lives of their own crew. This also isn't helped that they are trapped within something that if it were to come into contact with civilization, it would mean the complete and utter extinction of the human race as we know it. We get a small glimpse of this in Aliens, as just one facehugger is able to reduce a whole colony into a barren wasteland infected with xenomorphs within days. That means within the film, not only are you trapped with an alien that could mean the extinction of the human race as we know it, but you're also dealing with a company that cares more about the planet destroying an alien than your own life. There is no safe spaces in this film, and the safe spaces that do exist, such as Dallas, Parker, and Ash, are all eliminated by the foe or revealed to be antagonists in disguise. You cannot trust anyone within this film as being a true safe space, because no one in this film is truly safe. That's why this film is so frighteningly effective, but that's not to say that every single film that uses this trope is suddenly Alien or 2001. No, there's some real clunkers horror space films. Like, hell, many of them directly came after Alien came out, with films like Galaxy of Terror seeing the money that Alien made and tries to replicate the look and feel of that film. But overall, a lot of it is incredibly flat, as a lot of the passion behind Alien did not translate into the Roger Corman film, even with a young James Cameron running the production design of the film, who would later of course make the just as successful sequel to Aliens 5 years later. And in the 90s and the early 2000s, an even more aggravating form of space horror would come out, that of course being the space slasher film, which took the atmosphere and world building that made the first Alien film so frightening and combining it with a slasher movie villain like Jason for Jason X. Many of these films lacked the passion or creativity that came with something like Alien, forgetting the roots of what makes space horror so frightening. First off, the characters. With space horror's fear coming from characters we care about being trapped with an unknowable being, were extremely important. However, many of the films gave us the watered-down stereotypical characters that are commonplace within the subgenre. This does not exactly blend well with the whole idea behind space horror, which is the fear of being trapped with no hope for our characters besides their own wits and teamwork. Thus, many of these slasher films feel quite hollow, as the whole space aspect of these films being just absurd gimmicks rather than truly thought out and explored in a way that makes for interesting cinema. However, there is one branch of space horror that is still going alive and well to this very day, with the most common branch of it now being that of combining the elements that made films like Alien so successful with cosmic horror monsters. One of the first films to do this, despite its interesting quality, is 1997's Event Horizon. This film combines the atmosphere and world building of Alien with demons and hell-like monsters straight out of Hellraiser. And despite the film's unfortunate execution, the idea of the film is still quite interesting and frightening, because it combines the fear of the unknown with the fear that comes along with the subgenre, as these people are now trapped with said fear. That makes these films interesting in their own right, due to just how well these two concepts combine with one another, as without it, Event Horizon would honestly just be another Alien clone. But of course, this isn't dedicated to just film. Now, you can't talk about modern space horror without mentioning one specific medium, that of course being video games, which space horror has really taken a stronghold in. There's Metroid, Dead Space, and even Alien Isolation, which all take the concept of space horror and make it so that we must play through the horrific scenarios ourselves. I've already done a whole video on how the Metroid games do it, but Dead Space I think does it the best. Dead Space traps you with a monster, the Necromorphs, that is much more like John Carpenter's The Thing. Just like most of space horror, there is no escape. You are stuck on this ship with those things, and they want to take you out as quickly as possible. What also makes the Necromorphs so frightening is just like The Thing, the Necromorphs adapt to what's around them really quickly, as they come in all shapes and sizes, with some being small and others being full size, and all are just as deadly as the last. And it makes it so that all those tight corridors that you have to explore, that there might be one of those monsters hiding somewhere in it, that could pop out and kill you at any moment. However, while I think Dead Space does the whole concept the best, Alien Isolation perfected this feeling more so than any other game, as unlike Dead Space, which pre-planned all the scares within it, making second playthroughs less frightening, and instead made it so that the alien would react to one thing, and if it noticed it, you were completely doomed. That of course being sound, and I swear that quite literally everything in this game was extremely loud. That made it so throughout the game that the alien truly could jump you if you weren't paying any attention, as it could hear everything, and made the game a truly frightening and invigorating experience.
I don't feel ready. I feel like I can't do anything.
So last week while covering the films that inspired analog horror, I talked about how I wanted to cover Lake Mungo at some point due to the film being just that well made and horrifying for a mockumentary. So instead of doing a long wait on covering the film, I'm just going to do it this week, as this is just one of the best horror films to do the mockumentary style. And when I say it does the mockumentary for horror well, I truly mean it. They play this story completely and utterly straight. There is no crazy movie magic on display, and even though the film is technically a ghost story, there isn't anything so absolutely strange in there that it takes you out of the story whatsoever. And the story of the film has absolutely one of the most heartbreaking endings I've ever seen within a film, which I will get back into later. And the way the film is put together makes it one of the most cohesive mockumentaries out there, putting things like The Last Broadcast and The Blair Witch Project to shame. But I also wanted to compare it to one of my least favorite of the horror mockumentaries, which I think has been unfairly compared to Lake Mungo and the level of quality between the two films. And that is, of course, the Puff Keepsy tapes. I despise this movie. I have never understood why this film has gotten onto the same level of praise as Lake Mungo has, as I think the film fails at what makes everything in Lake Mungo interesting. And I do not say that lightly. I know horror films generally don't have as good of quality as a lot of the other genres do, but I think this one really stands out on just how bad it is. While the idea of the film, a serial killer creating tapes of all the victims he has captured and killed over the years, is frankly terrifying, and it has many links to what actual serial killers have done, but even though it has all that going for it, I think the film has one major central flaw that Lake Mungo does not have. And that big central flaw will really take you out of the film, as it's essential for making the idea of the horror mockumentary work. But you're gonna have to wait to find out. And before we go any further, remember to like and subscribe. And if you liked the video, comment down below your thoughts on it. And let's get on with the actual video. A 16-year-old in Australia named Alice Palmer drowns near a lake, and suddenly, while taking pictures, her older brother Matthew starts seeing her in the background of these images. This starts giving the mother and father some hope that maybe she is in the afterlife and is still there with them, essentially giving them some hope they lost when she died, and gives them some more reason to be happy because they think their daughter will always be with them. However, it's slowly revealed that all the photographs are indeed doctored by the brother to add Alice to the background of the images, as he wanted the parents to exhume the body to give them closure on what actually happened with Alice. But in one of the really shocking videos, it's revealed that Alice had in fact had a sexual encounter with one of the neighbors, Brett, in a somewhat shocking twist. twist. Then one of the interviewees revealed that before she had drowned, she had been having nightmares and dreams about having herself drown, almost like she was having psychic visions of her own utter demise. Then Alice's boyfriend shows up with footage of Alice recorded on the night of her death on the school camping trip. During the footage, we see her burying something at the bottom of a tree near the lake. The family goes to the tree and finds a phone with some footage on it that she had recorded the night of her death. In the footage, we see her walking next to the lake when it reveals this.
I feel like I can't do anything.
To people not understanding the significance of this, the ghost looks almost exactly like the girl does after drowning. This is Alice seeing her own ghost, as the ghost looks exactly like the corpse that was shown earlier in the film. This scene is quite shocking, as the rest of the film has been sticking pretty closely to being as realistic as possible, which adds the extra layer of shock when the first explicitly supernatural thing happens within the film. There is no truly natural way to explain this. This can't be photoshopped or doctored in. This has to be a ghost that she is witnessing. Parents then leave the house, happy that they feel like their daughter has shown them what she wanted them to see, and that she has most likely moved on in the afterlife. But in a massive gut punch within the film, it reveals that Alice was actually within the photographs the whole time, hidden within the corners of the photos. So this leaves you with two possible ways of thinking about the ending. You could either believe that she actually was doing what they said, and that she was just trying to help them figure out what happened to her, leading them along the way, showing them the journey of her life, such as her death and her assault. However, this is not the picture that the film is probably trying to paint, and the actual picture is much more bleak. The other way of thinking is you could believe they were ignoring her throughout the whole film, like they have stated that they had done when she was actually alive, and were instead focusing on a list of non-issues and not on her actual presence within the film. And it shows either way that she has not indeed moved on, and she is still within the house. And either way, it leaves the sad idea that now that they have left, they have once again left her completely and utterly alone. And I think within the film it shows just how mysterious Alice was. I don't want to explicitly call the parents bad, but the parents don't seem to know much about her, as her friends seem to be able to talk more about what she was actually like, as the parents mostly just talk about her death rather than how she was as a person. Then this final picture just comes and continues with how she was in life, ignored and left behind. Even in death by her own parents, she is left completely and utterly alone. And this idea is frankly horrifically depressing and just leaves you completely heartbroken while watching the film, as such a sad idea. The idea of this film has stuck with me since I watched it years ago. See, I watched it first around 6 years ago, and I liked it back then as I thought the filmmaking was just superb and well put together. But watching it now, I appreciate the story even more due to just how frankly horrific the idea is. The idea of drowning and then coming back as a ghost to try and communicate with your parents, just to be ignored, is such a sad and terrifying idea. And the ideas behind it will stick with you, guaranteed. What also makes this film work so well is the realism surrounding the ghost story. Besides one scene, the film sticks to a ridiculous level of realism that makes the supernatural part that much more believable. Even the way the ghost is put into the story feels real, just being in the background, essentially watching what's going on within the film. And the interviews also flow in a way that many other documentaries do. These are not crazy performances. These feel just like real people being interviewed. With how well this film is put together, you would think I would say that the film has no flaws, but it definitely has a couple. For example, the scene with the assault is just kind of put in there. They start the thread of what could have possibly happened with her and the neighbor, but it just sort of stops. It took me out of the film slightly, because most of the documentaries would have zeroed in on that and explored the thread to its end. The other thing that took me out of it was just how dark it was. I mean, yeah, a lot of it is raw footage,
so this is somewhat a double-edged sword, but because of how dark it is, you can't really see anything. I don't expect studio lighting in the lake scene, for example, but I wish the photos had been a little bit brighter, as it makes it extremely difficult to see the final reveal even though they zoom in on it. But these aren't huge flaws, they're pretty small flaws in the whole scheme of things. But besides those very small gripes, the film works extremely well and will leave you completely devastated if you watch it. 8 out of 10. See, I was told by multiple people that this film would be right up my alley, a mockumentary on a serial killer where we see all the tapes the serial killer recorded of all of his victims, mainly focusing on the one that got out alive, Cheryl. We see Cheryl get tortured by the killer and turn into his slave, and as he messes with her family, including going to the parents' house and messing with the mother, as she realizes he is the killer. And all of that is essentially the main plot of the film. But what really ruins this film is the terrible amount of shock value within the film. The film has so much shock value, it reminds me of things like Urban Spook put into film form. I mean this seriously. The shock value of this film is so high that it goes back down to just being boring and unrealistic. You need to find a balance between shock and actual plot, and the plot of this film is so weak, and the film is based around shock value just entirely. There is nothing else of value going on within this film. This film is such a slog, and even though the idea of the film is slightly more realistic than Lake Mungo, the film feels less believable than the Ghost movie does. One of the parts that really stuck out with me is as something that is supposed to be a documentary, is actually showing the shocking parts within the film. See, while documentaries can be shocking, they usually don't cross the line of showing actual murders and torture, as that's plain just disgusting and disgraceful to the victims of the people in real life. Because of that, that film really takes me out, because I know no documentary would be made like this. It's just too over the top. And although the performances are muted like a documentary should be, the film doesn't stay realistic with the extremely graphic torture scenes that I think I've never seen in a documentary, and I've seen a lot of true crime documentaries. This film has so much shock value in it that it feels like something an edgy teenager would write, and I mean that in the harshest possible way. I highly dislike this film. This film frustrated me to no end, and I have seen some pretty terrible films over the years. I mean, one of my favorite genres is horror, for Christ's sake. That is one of the goofiest subgenres of any film. There's almost no, horror film that doesn't have a level of goofiness to it. But this film was shockingly bad, and it shows how I think you should not make one of these mockumentaries. I never understood why so many people were praising this film, and because of all the reasons I mentioned above, I give it a 2 out of 10.
Horror has always been a genre of highs and lows. Some films haunt us for years, while others fade from memory the moment the lights come on. Some films are able to craft scenes that stick with you for hours that make the films as memorable as possible, while others leave you wanting more out of the film, leaving with extreme disappointment. However, one thing is certain between the two, despite one failing at it and the other succeeding, which is that the film is trying to make you feel fear. Fear is what makes horror as memorable as it is, as without fear, there really wouldn't be a strong emotion that comes along with it. All good films make you feel some sort of way, and without fear, what would horror exactly make us feel? Some horror films make us feel depressed, happy, or on the edge of our seats, but the main goal is nearly always to make us feel afraid. And now let's look at two scenes that make this their main goal, as both of these scenes are trying to make us as scared as humanly possible. One is from the 2014 film It Follows, and the other is from 2012's Sinister, which while both films were received pretty similarly, they both have one major difference between one another. I should also specify before going any further, major spoilers ahead. If I talk about any of these movies that you haven't seen yet, go watch them first before watching the video. If you have not seen any of the films listed above, proceed with caution. Okay, now let's continue. For It Follows, we follow a college girl named Jay who, after sleeping with her boyfriend, gets transmitted an STD that causes some sort of demonic entity to start following her everywhere she goes. And because of this, she decides to spend the night with her friends, which during the middle she hears a window break and finds a variant of the monster in the kitchen, which quickly disappears when her friends rush down. She then begins to question herself, as does the audience, but in the back of our minds we know that it's still in the house with her. We, the audience, know that this is real due to the opening, but she doesn't know yet if it's real or not. They then rush her upstairs, where she begins to have a meltdown, and we hear a knocking, which is revealed to be a fake out, and everything seems to be fine, like maybe she's just seeing things. And now let's compare that to the ending of Sinister, which follows a prolific writer, Ellison Oswalt, who finds a stash of Super 8 reels showing the brutal murders of families across the US, which is slowly revealed to be the work of an ancient demon named Bagul, a monstrous entity who possesses children and makes them kill their entire family before proceeding to take them away to hell. This is all revealed in the extended cut that Ellison receives upon moving back to his house, where he is then murdered by his own daughter in the exact same fashion as the ones in the videotapes before him. And I'm not here to rag on Sinister. I actually think Sinister as a whole is an excellent film. However, what I'm actually here to rag on is the ending of the film, which was added on by the studio. The film ends with a slow zoom in on the box of Super 8 tapes before this happens. Now, with looking at these two scenes, you may not really even see the issue, as both are quite effective scares upon their first viewing. However, we need to look at how they fit into the context of the films that they are in. It Follows is a film based on subtlety, with many of the scares involving frightening figures and tight corridors rather than the more traditional jump scares that have become overwhelming in the past decade. The titular monster in this case isn't a fast-moving, extremely unpredictable beast. Instead, it watches from afar, waiting until the person thinks they're safe before eventually sneaking up on them. We see this throughout the film, as in almost every shot after becoming infected, we see someone following them in the background, watching them from afar. This scare aligns with that filmmaking philosophy perfectly, as while it's a more overt scare, it makes perfect sense within the context of the film, and portraying the monster as a larger-than-life figure makes it that much more frightening. It doesn't have the need for a loud musical sting. Instead, it knows that the image is startling enough on its own, and it's much more powerful due to the context of the scene before it. We already knew that it was in the house with her, and the arrival of the extremely tall man is the payoff of that tension. Now let's compare that to the final scare in Sinister, which, while the rest of the film does a good job bringing in the tension for a lot of its scares, we have next to no setup for this final scare. There is next to no reason behind this scare for the story. Instead, it's just a seemingly final scare just to leave the audience frightened at the very end. And honestly, it makes perfect sense that the scene was added to the film due to studio meddling, as originally the director just wanted to have a slow zoom in on the box of tapes, leaving the film with a sense of unease, as we know another family is about to fall victim to Bagul's trap. However, with this jump scare at the end of the film, all that tension that has been built up throughout the entire film is let go, instead giving it all away for one last big scare. And this is one of the issues that's been plaguing studio horror films for decades, but has seemingly gotten worse. This really illustrates one of my points, though, that horror has gotten to the point where it's trying to shock us and use short-term scares rather than trying to make something that will stick with us for hours afterwards. And honestly, this makes horror no different than a haunted house ride, and honestly, it's one of the main reasons why I have tons of issues with studios like Blumhouse, which turns out these types of films every single year. See, horror is all about two things: setups and payoffs. Think of a scare like a good joke, with the tension being the setup and the scare a punchline. What makes the scare so effective in It Follows is the setup. I'm sure on its own you found the Bagul scare much more frightening, but in the context of the film as a whole, the scare in It Follows is generally much more effective and hard-hitting. This makes the scare hit that much harder, as without the setup we wouldn't have the payoff. But compare that to Sinister's scare, where we just get the setup of a box and then the jump scare. There's no tension in the scene, rather just a quick dopamine rush to end the film. However, this dopamine rush
also completely flatlines any tension that was built up beforehand. This is fine for It Follows, as this is the middle of the film and the tension still has time to build back up. However, in Sinister, this final scare completely removes all tension in favor of a short dopamine rush that the audience will most likely forget about in a couple of minutes. It's not executed well, and frankly, the scare is just completely uninteresting. And this is an issue that has plagued modern horror and horror in general for decades now. Instead of long, drawn-out scares that keep the audience engaged, the films instead relentlessly beat us over and over again with jump scare after jump scare to just give these short dopamine rushes, and that's it. Take last year's Imaginary, for example. This film was frankly terrible. There was next to no redeeming qualities about it, and instead it was just another jump scare filled mess that had nothing to say and no emotions to go along with it. When watching a film, one of my factors that when considering if it's good or not is whether or not it actually made me feel something, and to be honest, these films make me feel nothing. They don't make me scared or on edge or even disturbed. Instead, they honestly just make me frustrated. It's a cheap tactic, as what we are seeing isn't frightening, rather the noise that comes along with it is so ear-piercingly loud that it completely catches you off guard. And just like all forms of filmmaking, the best movies use multiple different tactics at once in order to keep us truly engaged with what's going on, and only using one singular tactic makes the film intolerable. Hell, this isn't even limited to jump scares, as it's one of the reasons why the Saw movies also got so bad, as it completely misses the point of what made the original film so scary. What made the original Saw so frightening while the traps were creepy was the atmosphere and setups that James Wan built around every single scene. The scene with the camera is still excellent to this very day and is one of my personal favorite jump scares, and the film utilizes scares like this to an excellent effect to make the film more frightening. However, the sequels to the film instead just focused on the traps more and more as the main scare tactic, essentially becoming torture porn flicks and nothing else. Yes, the scare may be shocking, but do you actually feel anything after witnessing it? Yeah, they're gross, but that's all they really are. You will most likely forget about a lot of the traps from the films, besides a few notable exceptions, of course. It's also one of the main reasons why some people got tired of things like Urban Spook, as it was honestly just another one-trick pony, as the only singular thing that the series could do was make us grossed out, but it forgot the actual tension that makes horror so spectacular in the first place. And in all honesty, that shows one major flaw with horror at this very moment, and that it's so focused on short-term viral scares that it forgets the actual story and emotion behind it. And that's not to say that there aren't any films doing something different and original. There are tons of interesting stuff out there to see, as companies like A24 have been pushing back against this with films like Hereditary and The Lighthouse, both using excellent scare tactics that, while it might not be a haunted house type dopamine rush, will instead stick with you for hours afterwards and leave a scar within your mind. Horror has always been about taking risks, so if you really want to get your film to be remembered, don't do what everyone else is doing and make it your own. When watching a horror film or playing a horror game, one thing is consistent between the two of them, and that is an overwhelming fear of the unknown. Both games and movies do this in different ways and play with the viewers as much as possible. For films, we are usually introduced to the monster creature that is meant to cause fear, but we are left in the dark with how it works and how to take it down, leaving us with the fear of the unknown. And for video games, it usually builds up the fear of the unknown through the tension it provides, allowing us slight glances of what we should be afraid of before quickly hiding it away once again. But first, what exactly is the fear of the unknown? In many of our lives, we often fear things that we do not understand, which has been caused by our brains fearing situations that we don't know, as they could potentially be dangerous. If we don't understand how something works or what something exactly is, then this causes great anxiety in most of us, so of course horror is going to play off of that. And a lot of the best horror media in the past decades have been examples of playing with this fear in some sort of way. From Iron Lung to Five Nights at Freddy's, and even to films like Annihilation and Nope, which greatly play off this fear in different ways. Speaking of, spoilers for these games and films. If you haven't watched or played these games yet, then go do that. Seriously, go check these out. These are some of the best horror IPs from the past 10 years. If you haven't watched or played them, then you are truly missing out. Also, before continuing, make sure to let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of these games and films. Do you think that they are effective? Do you think they're not? Some people may agree, some may disagree. Okay, now let's continue. First off, let's look at the game Iron Lung. Released in 2022 by David Szymanski, Iron Lung is a deceptively simple game. We are trapped in a submarine with next to no space in an ocean full of the unknown. What could possibly be down here? What are we truly looking for down here? This is a space that seems truly lifeless, or is it? Iron Lung makes you ask all these questions while playing, if not more, and it causes a level of paranoia that is not especially common in a lot of horror games. You are always wondering if your ship is going to run into something that you don't know. There could be literally anything down here. All you have to see the world around you with is this tiny window, which truly doesn't reveal a single thing, and the camera processor in the back, which gives us subtle glances of what the world around us looks like. And you can see your oxygen within the ship slowly ticking down, leading closer and closer to your inevitable demise. And past a certain point, you start to realize there's no true escape here. Your oxygen is low and you are miles deep within this cave system. It's a truly ominous feeling that's hard to describe if you haven't played the game yourself, but the slow unraveling dread when you start to realize just how doomed you are is next to none. And it's not even talking about our little friend who starts to become more visible throughout the runtime. We first see him in the background watching us from one of the artifacts, telling us that this ocean is not in fact as empty as we once thought. Instead, we are stuck in here with whatever this thing is. And honestly, it's a very disturbing realization as we don't know what this thing wants and if it's hostile or if it's not. But we do know that it's a big motherfucker, and honestly does not look friendly. Then upon collecting about 2/3 of the artifacts while traveling, you start to notice a bunch more beeps than there were there before. So let's go take another picture. Let's see what's around us at this very moment. And this scare is extremely effective and plays off the fear of the unknown better than most games I've seen, and I say most of as we're going to be talking about another one soon, but this scare does the fear of the unknown perfectly. When taking the photo, you know that something has to be around, but you're not expecting the eye to be looking directly at you from the camera, giving a moment where it seems like whatever is out there is sentient enough to recognize that you do not belong. It is a perfect payoff for the atmosphere at play here, as we've been waiting on the edge of our seats in anticipation of what could possibly be out there, and we get short glimpses of it, but here in this part we get to see it in its full glory. It uses the fear of the unknown to a wonderful effect, as we know that something was in there, but we didn't know exactly what it was or what it is, and if it's something that we should be afraid of, but in this moment it's revealed to be a threat to us directly. This fish is not a friend, but is in fact a foe. It is a wonderfully direct confrontational moment, which leads me to my next IP, that of course being the famous I think sometimes we forget just how effective the original FNAF game is. It's not just a basic kids horror game like we know the franchise as now, instead it's a deeply frightening experience that plays with the fear of the unknown perfectly, dropping us off in a job we do not understand and a dark pizzeria that is filled with unpredictable robots. It is a deeply disturbing and frightening experience if you've never played it before. Where the fear of the unknown really comes into play here though is within the entire pizzeria itself. We have no idea why the animatronics are so hostile at this point, and while we get some slow little snippets, the game never truly tells you what's going on here, leaving you quite literally in the dark. You don't know how these creatures behave, and they move in unexpected ways towards you, slowly inching closer and closer without exactly knowing what your fate is going to be. And honestly, it's a bit of a masterclass in portraying the fear of the unknown, as just like Iron Lung, it draws us off in a location where we have no idea what's ahead of us, only giving small snippets of info to help us move forward. I think people sometimes forget just how loreless the original FNAF game truly was, especially in comparison to the sequels that came afterwards, giving every single animatronic some piece of lore. All we really get is some snippets of newspapers, and that really just hints at something horrific happening here, but never really gives us the full picture of why these animatronics are attacking us. And honestly, this is one of the reasons the sequels somewhat floundered, as many of the games tried to over-explain every single aspect, removing the fear of the Unknown that made the original game as creepy as it was. Not to mention the sound design also blending in the fear of the unknown, with pots and pans being thrown around, signaling that something is nearby, but you can't check to see how close the animatronic actually is due to the camera in the kitchen being out. It's wonderful world building, and there's a reason the original game was as effective as it was, and still remains as effective as it was to this very day, just like the next one that used the fear of the unknown to its greatest strength, that of course being I actually haven't really talked about Nope on this channel yet, and honestly it's a bit of a disservice that I hadn't yet. In Nope, we follow the Haywood family as they train horses for film productions, but one night the horses begin to act somewhat strange. They begin to become violent, and people start to notice what looks like a UFO flying around stealing their horses. During a show started by Jupe, the showman and theme park manager nearby, we see the UFO suck up and consume the entire crowd, Jupe included. The UFO then begins to go on a tirade, attempting to kill nearly everything that enters within the valley, and this entire first section of the film works incredibly well, as we never really get a good glance of the UFO. Instead, the scene of everyone getting sucked up is portrayed entirely in shadow. We have no idea what the threat is here, besides the fact that it's a UFO and it's eating people in the most gruesome possible way. This is a perfect display of the fear of the unknown, as what makes the UFO as scary as it is within the film is the fact that we don't know hardly anything about it whatsoever. All we know about it is that it likes to consume people in the most gruesome way possible and doesn't leave any remnants behind of any of its past victims. And honestly, it's somewhat Lovecraftian in style, with almost every single person who does see it has a really hard time trying to describe what they witnessed, as how do you describe something you don't truly understand? And honestly, this is why the second half of the film flatlines, as once we see the monstrous UFO, all of the weight that we had from the unknown had been completely lifted. This shows another major aspect of the fear of the unknown when it comes to filmmaking and media creation, which is that once you finally decide to reveal it, if at all, it's gotta live up to the expectations of what people have in their minds in the first place. Usually it's a much safer bet, however, to just leave it in the unknown, as sometimes people's expectations can be set too high, which definitely is the case for Nope. Honestly, it's not even the film's fault, but rather it just doesn't live up to the expectations set by the film in its first half, and that's honestly fine. That's because the first half of it is just that memorable, with no moment where that fear of the unknown doesn't radiate over the scene, with nearly every moment casting that fear that something could go horribly, horribly wrong. Which is something that the next film does, that of course being I've talked about Annihilation on this channel before multiple times, but mostly in the sense of its cosmic horror, which has heavy roots in the fear of the unknown, but this time I wanted to focus instead sharply on the fear of the unknown aspect within it. This mainly comes from the first half of the film, where Lena is interrogated for her experience in the Shimmer, an anomalous zone within Florida where DNA of all the creatures caught within begin to morph and mesh together, making a horrific amalgamation such as alligators with multiple rows of teeth, and bears that can imitate human speech. But where the fear of the unknown comes from the entire film is not just the Shimmer itself, but rather the fact that it's revealed at the very beginning that she was the only survivor of the mission in the first place. This one small bit of information is the foundation for the rest of the fear of the unknown within the film, as we know that whatever is within the Shimmer must be extremely dangerous if she is the only survivor of the group of people who went into it. And at this point, we really do not know what resides within, and that makes the scenes of them exploring the Shimmer that much more frightening, as we know that all but Lena died, so anyone can be taken out at any point that isn't Lena. And we also have no idea what took them out in the first place. It could be literally anything within the Shimmer. And then there's the Shimmer itself. We have no idea how it works besides it splices DNA, and it's even better as the film never really tries to even explain it. Rather, it leaves it all up to the viewer's imagination how it works, making it even stranger when at the very end it's revealed that after she left, that it rapidly disappeared, leaving the zone completely normal. This leaves the fear of the unknown in the viewer's mind, as we have no idea whatsoever what the Shimmer is, and the film never gives a full explanation, leaving you completely within the dark. This honestly makes Annihilation a masterclass within the fear of the unknown, as almost every single aspect of the film is pulling onto that fear, and unlike Nope, it continues throughout the entire film. This includes the final scene, making us ask, did Lena actually survive, or did her doppelganger? It's wonderful filmmaking, and honestly one of the biggest exemplifiers of why the fear of the unknown is as important as it is for horror. And to finally end this all out, all of these creations exemplify the fear of the unknown to its highest degree, and without the fear, these creations would not be the same. Just like I've said before, horror is all about using different techniques in tandem with one another to create a frightening experience, and these creations all do that to different degrees. However, the driving force behind all of these is the fear of the unknown, and it's one of the most powerful tools that a content creator has at their disposal.
Genres, a way of characterizing art by the similarities in their style, form, and subject matter. Every single film you've seen falls into some sort of genre, from action flicks like Mission Impossible, John Wick and The Raid, to horror flicks like Alien, The Thing, and Halloween. They all fit somewhat easily into one of these categories. But what about films that flip-flop constantly between genres to the point where we really can't tell what exact genre they are a part of? We see this a lot in films like Oldboy, Parasite, and Bone Tomahawk, films that rapidly change the genre that they would fall into scene by scene, but not in a way that feels like a chaotic mess. It's something that's really difficult to pull off in a way that feels seamless, as with what was stated before, the styles of these films often change to reflect the new genre it is switching to. But before getting into these films, major spoilers for these films ahead. If you haven't seen any of these films listed below, make sure to go and watch them. Also, if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe if you liked the video, and let me know in the comments down below what you think. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Okay, now let's continue. For example, while I would consider Parasite overall to be a family genre, some of the scenes swap to a more horror and thriller-esque filmmaking style. Most specifically, with the scene of them going into the basement of the house to meet the husband of the former housekeeper. In this scene, while the rest of the film is more open and bright, more characteristic of the family drama style of filming, it instead swaps to dingy lighting and tight corridors, something much more characteristic of a thriller or horror film. And this is a swap that continues throughout the rest of the film, with the rest of the film after following those same framing techniques as it moves to the more thriller section of the film, as the family slowly realizes just how much they doom themselves as they now have committed murder. This is a very clear switch up within the film, and films that are able to do this around some sort of plot twist, although are extremely common, it's extremely rare for a film to do it correctly. It's a surefire way to keep your audience intrigued, as if you went in expecting the whole film to stay in the same groove, such a big switch up may be shocking and drag you back into the film if you were starting to drift away. Hell, one of the most famous examples of this includes the film Psycho, a switch up so shocking at the time of its release that people were actually fainting within the theater and boycotting the film due to it being seen as obscene. See, for some quick background, Alfred Hitchcock before this point had really only been within the thriller genre, and he was strictly within it, with films like North by Northwest and Rope. Most of his films did not switch up and stayed on their course for their entire runtime, so it was even more shocking when at the end of the first 30 minutes of Psycho, which had been setting up the film as a thriller, our main character is brutally murdered, showing the film's true horror colors. This genre switch up is so extreme that it literally made people boycott the film and try to get the film banned, as literally no one had any idea the switch up was going to happen. Hell, the trailers for this film were infamous anyways, because Hitchcock purposely did not show any footage from the actual film, instead only walking through the set showing off the Bates Motel. It's a wonderful change, however, I do not think it's my personal favorite. My personal favorite genre changeup has got to be the switch from an action war film to a sci-fi slasher film in 1987's Predator. Predator starts off extremely simply with a start we've seen in hundreds of 80s action films, with Dutch and his group of army commandos being set deep into the rainforest to save some US soldiers. This film is simple, deceptively simple, seeming a lot like Schwarzenegger's previous film Commando, which, don't get me wrong, it's a fun movie but it has not aged particularly amazing. However, upon actually landing within the forest, things already begin to feel off. Like, yeah, it's just the forest, but the atmosphere of the film immediately begins to change. Instead of the happy-go-lucky characters that we saw conversing at the beginning, suddenly the characters get all serious and an atmospheric drum begins to play in the background. They seem to be watching everything around them, like they could be jumped at any moment, and the music almost makes it seem like something is watching them at all times. Then things quickly take a dark turn as they find the bodies of the group they were searching for quite literally skinned alive and hanging upside down within the forest in an extremely grisly sight. This is already much more gruesome than a lot of the other 80s action films, and the framing reflects that, with the sequence being edited and shot in a way that makes the bodies work like a jump scare. This is a very clear hint of things to come, but just like the characters, we assume that maybe the enemy they are looking for is just extremely violent, as while the sight is gruesome, they seem to have seen worse over the years. And then upon finding the enemy camp, we get a goofy action sequence highly reminiscent of Schwarzenegger's other work. But at the end of the scene, we start to get a glimpse of something watching them from afar, and the tone quickly begins to change. Realizing that the mission was actually a setup by the CIA to do Dylan's mission for him, Dylan gets mad as they take a girl for more info into the forest to meet up with the helicopter. This is where there's a clear style change in the way it's shot. Rather than the big action showpieces, we instead get a much more somber tone with a lot more close-ups and much less space for our characters to go. It also emphasizes the emptiness of the forest, as there's quite literally no wildlife around them. Instead, all we hear are the sounds of the forest around them, with the occasional glimpses of something watching them from afar. And then the same drums begin from the scene of the hanging corpses, a clearer motif of the film that will come back later. This is the very beginning of the switch up, as just from the shot and sound design alone, we know that the characters are truly in danger, and this begins to build up the suspense. We know that something is watching them and is trying to learn their behaviors, but they don't yet, pulling on Hitchcock's law. Which, for those who don't know, for a quick explanation, that's when the audiences are told that our main characters are in danger, but the characters themselves don't know, which builds suspense as we're waiting for the moment where the danger finally confronts the characters. And when it finally does confront them in the killing of Blaine and Hawkins in brutal fashion, it quickly disperses them and takes them away for his trophy collection. From this point onward, I would venture to call this film a slasher film, not just in plot, but in the way the film is shot as well. Let's look at the quintessential slasher film, John Carpenter's Halloween. In this film, we see Laurie Strode get stalked and followed by Michael Myers, an escaped mental patient who killed his sister back in 1963. This film created a lot of the tropes we know from slasher films to this day, as every single time someone splits away from the group, they are killed, and the film ends with a nearly unkillable monster chasing the final girl throughout the world, leading to a battle of wits of who's smarter and who can survive. Predator uses these tropes to spectacular effect, as after the scene in the enemy encampment, every single time we see the characters split off from one another, they are picked off. And just like a lot of slasher films before them, the film changes rapidly. As well, in the first sequence, we were mainly looking up at these guys, showing how big and intimidating they are. It instead switches to higher angle shots, showing that from the monster's perspective, these hulks are in fact quite small and look incredibly unintimidating to our hunter. And it's emphasized in the final battle even more, as while they begin to fight, when Arnold gets pinned, we see just how much larger the Predator is in comparison to him, as he's played by Kevin Peter Hall, who famously stood at around 7'2". And to continue, as they get picked off one by one, this dwindles their members more and more, until finally Arnold is the only one remaining, fulfilling the final girl trope. And here's the thing. Unlike a lot of the other films that fall within the slasher subgenre, none of these characters are unintelligent. In fact, I would venture to say they're quite smart when it comes to their ways of trying to take it down. But what increases the tension of the film is that despite these characters making somewhat smart decisions and realizing just how the monster works, the creature is just a much better hunter than they are in every single way. One of my personal favorite sequences to show this is the confrontation that Mac and Dylan have with the Predator, as while we think that they may be able to outsmart it, as Mac is now able to spot it within the trees, watching them from afar, so maybe, just maybe, they'll be able to take it out without it knowing. However, this quickly gets proven wrong, as when they dispatch from one another, both quickly get wiped away extremely quickly. And while you may think Dylan's death is due to incompetence, I think that his death makes much more sense in the context of the film. Remember, these commandos were just sent here on a standard recon mission, and at this point, they all still just assume this is a soldier with some sort of advanced technology. But when confronted head-on with the alien, Dylan realizes that this is in fact not human, but something much, much more advanced, and we see this in his reaction as he completely freezes up. The same thing happens with Mac, as while he thinks that he's sneaking up on the Predator, he quickly realizes by the laser that he has in fact just walked directly into the trap the Predator set in the first place. And then there's the death of Billy, who realizes that the monster is in fact hunting for sport, so he decides he wants to see if the monster would be willing to do a fair fight, as he takes everything off and instead only uses his knife.
And the monster obliges, but still quickly disperses him, showing that while the monster is hunting with more advanced technology, it still wants to hunt in a way that's fair, showing that it's more for sport rather than just hunting for food. All of this increases tension to the highest degree, as this monster isn't really something that can be reasoned with, and while most monsters in the films are feral and instinct-driven, this one is a bit different. Rather, this one is much more intelligent, much more like a slasher film villain like Michael Myers. And all of this tension that has been building up throughout the entire film boils up in the entire finale of the film, following Dutch as he is completely left alone with the monster with no weapons but rather just his wits. But unlike his peers who unfortunately were dispatched too early, Dutch has learned from the deaths of his peers. Now he knows exactly how this creature works, as he knows that the predator must be using some sort of heat vision, thus he uses mud to cover up his heat signature. He then sets up tons of traps, which he uses to actually begin hurting the predator, and of course ultimately dispatches the predator. Just like in a lot of slasher films, he learns how to defeat it from the people who didn't make it before, and while it still is a bit more action in a sense than Halloween, Dutch is just as vulnerable to the alien as Laurie Strode is. The alien is a much better hunter than Dutch is, and he knows that, which is where the tension of the film comes from. And unlike the others who thought the monster was somewhat equal or lesser than them, Dutch knows that this is something a bit more and instead tries to outsmart it, which of course ends up working, but just like a slasher film, the killer does not get dispatched easily, instead being taken down multiple times just to get right back up and continuing to hunt Dutch. It's very slasher-esque, and while most people would not go far enough to call it a slasher film, I'm going to take the leap and call it one and a major genre switch in the film, and it does this excellently. From the wonderful framing change to the weakness in such powerful characters, it's powerful filmmaking, and it's an excellent switch up that keeps us on our toes for the rest of the film, and really just shows how powerful this tool can be for future films.
Silence. One of the most important skills in a content creator's arsenal. Every single piece of media has some moments of silence within it. For filmmaking a media format where 50% of the finished product is the sound design behind it, the moments of pure silence stand out even more. It's so common within filmmaking that silence generally gets its own beat when you are detailing your instructions to actors. But you may be asking, why is silence so important, and what does silence do to provoke such a warranted effort behind it? Silence, despite noticeably being the complete absence of sound, provokes more emotion sometimes than if the scene was presented with all the sound you could possibly muster. So what does it do to the viewer that filmmakers generally play out the silence that they are using within their films? Well, it's two things: drawing out tension and bringing more focus on the visuals. It usually does this in tandem with one another rather than the ideas being wholly separate. All of these things are grown by silence, and without it would not elicit anywhere near the same amount of emotional response. But before going into a deeper dive into how all these things work together, spoilers for these films ahead. If you haven't seen any of them, then go watch them. Seriously, go check out these works and watch them without spoilers. It ruins the fun. Also, if you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. I upload once per week, and make sure to let me know what you want to see in the comments down below. Okay, now let's get into it. One of the main ways that most people think about when it comes to silence as a technique in filmmaking is drawing out the tension within a scene. We've all seen a horror film where the characters are exploring a house and the sound goes completely out, putting you on the edge of your seat. And while you may know that it's a tactic, it may have you wondering why this is done in the first place. Well, it's because silence is usually made as a way of anticipation, as quietness isn't natural for most people. We are social creatures, so silence is a void in our minds, causing anxiety. It's part of the way that we are wired. Thus, films exploit this to the max when trying to make us feel uncomfortable. This makes us feel scared, as with what I said before, horror is much scarier with the ideas that we have in our head, so with us being left in silence, our mind begins to wander. Famously, J-horror uses silence as one of its main tools for making us feel as uncomfortable as possible. Take films like 1998's Ringu, where silence is used in every single scene to an extreme degree. For example, take the scene directly after Tomoko is killed by Sadako, a scene in which also uses silence to an extreme degree, when Reiko is exploring the house looking for evidence of what could have possibly happened. The entire sequence is dead silent, with the only noise that really comes through being the footsteps of Reiko as she looks around. There is not even a soundtrack playing, just pure silence with the room tone overwhelming everything else in the mix, which makes it even more surprising when it cuts to this. See, while we may not find this super shocking out of context like I've shown here, as the visual itself is not the most frightening, in context this scene is absolutely shocking. The absence of sound makes it so the loud violin screech hits even harder, so even without it not being that loud, it still feels like a jump scare. And the silence also leaves us wondering what could have possibly killed Tomoko, and whether we should be worried that this creature is still in the house with us. Silence allows the mind to wander, and this scene does it brilliantly, where it makes the big reveal even more surprising than it was in the first place. Without silence, the scene wouldn't be as effective as it was. However, this isn't the only J-horror film that uses this technique. Take 2002's Ju-on the Grudge. This film uses a similar tactic when Hitomi, the sister of the cursed Katsuya, who returns home unknowingly cursed herself. This sequence is entirely quiet, besides her footsteps and occasional talking, leaving us in our minds as we try to figure out what could be possibly going on here. She gets on the elevator and begins to ride up floor by floor. It does this without drawing significant attention, rather it lets the visuals do the talking for it, which I'll get back to later. And the entire scene continues on and on like this, the silence overwhelming. Because of this, if you aren't paying full attention, you may miss the ghost boy watching her while viewing, making the realization of him being there much more frightening than if it had the loud violin screech to go along with it. The silence accentuates the tension, so when we do notice the child watching her, it's much more tense than it would have been with sound. While silence does that, it does the job without the need for an overt soundtrack and may make the cue even more subtle, thus increasing the tension. And to show you how overt soundtracks can also ruin tension, there's actually an edit I found of this movie with extremely loud music. So here's the scene with an extreme soundtrack. And this is a theme throughout horror filmmaking as a whole, with one of my favorite examples of silence in horror being used in films like The Exorcist 3, which while being an okay movie overall, has an excellent sequence involving a hospital and pure silence. In the film, we hear about the Gemini Killer, a deceased serial killer who has come back from the dead to murder more people. Each person who is found by the police is found decapitated with some sort of religious symbol replacing their head, such as the head of Jesus. The Gemini Killer then boasts that he's going to kill a nurse, which it then cuts to a nearby nurse doing her nightly rounds on her hospital patients. There is next to no sound, and the only thing we hear is the footsteps and her keys jingling as she opens the door. And after 10 full minutes of this overwhelming silence, maybe, just maybe, she'll be safe in the Gemini Killer's bluffing. And what a powerful scene, using tension from silence to the most extreme degree. With the context of the scene before it, we know that she's in danger, playing off Hitchcock's Law, which I described in my last video. Which, for those who don't know, is just letting the audience know that the protagonist is in danger without telling them themselves. This already builds up tension in the first place, but the silence accentuates it to as high as it could possibly be. It's a wonderfully done sequence, and the payoff is extraordinary, showing just how powerful silence can be for building tension. However, I think this tactic is even better when it's used with the other form of it, that of course being connecting to the point before, that being it's used to build tension, the tension that comes along with it enhances the visuals and raises them more to the forefront of the viewer's mind. For example, let's look at the hotel sequence in No Country for Old Men, which follows Moss, a guy who finds a drug deal gone wrong and takes the money. What he doesn't know is the money actually has a tracker within it, which is being followed by the cartel's hitman, Anton Chigurh. Thus, this once again uses Hitchcock's Law, as we know that he is in danger as Chigurh has been using the tracker, but Moss has no idea he's been followed yet. After stopping at a hotel, he realizes that the tracker is in there and tosses it out, but after doing that, it's revealed that it's already too late and that Chigurh is already there, having killed the hotel owner. This leads to one of the most silent but most aggressive sequences in the film, in which while in pure silence we see Chigurh turn off the lights, load his gun, and blow out the doorknob in the door. It does this scene
in complete silence, but rather than just using it to build tension, which it most definitely does, it also gets you a closer look at to what the visuals are portraying. All the things I said are not explicitly shown, but we are able to infer all of this from the shadows alone, which if you were so focused on the soundtrack, you wouldn't really be able to understand. It also makes the visuals much more impactful, as usually while watching you are trying to balance the acts together. It's a wonderfully done sequence, as the tension is so strong that it drags the viewer directly into what Moss is experiencing, as we're picking up on every cue that he is. It makes for one of the most brutal sequences in the film, and it's grueling to watch. And because of the silence, the scene is that much more impactful and makes you focus on every little detail, adding even more to the suspense that the film was created in the first place. And the entire film is like that, with nearly the rest of the runtime being without a soundtrack in any form. It really puts you into the character's shoes more than anything else and makes for a riveting experience. But to show it's not just films that are playing off this usage of silence, let's look at how analog horror shorts like The Oldest View also use silence to enhance the visuals. The entire short is nearly silent, besides the very basic background noises such as footsteps, the major heel turns, and the occasional song. It does build tension, but also makes it so the visual storytelling on display is much more potent. It causes you to look around more, which allows you to notice some of the scares slightly before he sees them, with one of my favorites being the giant being able to be seen in the dark. While you would still probably notice it with the soundtrack, the lack of soundtrack makes it so you might not notice more little details surrounding it, thus making the tension that much thicker, as we know he has no idea about the giant that's in the room yet. Then there's the way a lot of analog horror series present the scares, with series like Mandela Catalog using it, where the sound design before this point is assaulting, as it overwhelms you, so when it cuts to complete silence with a slightly disturbing face, it makes it much more unsettling. However, I think this person suffers from one major thing that goes wrong with films that use this technique, which is that the payoff of the silence is usually not good enough to warrant the visual enhancement brought by the silence itself. It needs to have ideas that the viewer can be more intrigued by with the long wait. If you leave the visual in the silence for too long, the flaws with what you are showing start to become more and more apparent. But if it's used correctly and the visuals that they are accommodating live up to the actual level of exposure, it can bring a level of tension that wasn't there before. In conclusion, silence can be one of the most powerful filmmaking techniques for building the tension and atmosphere that you are trying to set. Silence does this by doing two important steps: drawing out tension and enhancing the visuals. These two steps usually coincide with one another, and honestly the examples that I gave for both sections can work for either section. All of these examples work with one another, as many films use both techniques at the same time to enhance the scene to make the atmosphere as strong as possible. Without it, a lot of the most powerful scenes that we have in modern horror would be nowhere near as strong as they are. And with all that being said, make sure if you haven't already to like and subscribe, and let me know what you want to see next. I do take recommendations, and tell me the ideas of horror videos you would like to see. And I'll see you all next week.